Hi, everyone. Welcome to Happy to See Me, the podcast that puts the spotlight on the overlooked and underestimated. And this is a special happy hour episode because a few days ago, it was my podcast 1-year anniversary. And one, I want to say thank you to everybody who has tuned into the episodes over the last year. Can't believe that in my first year, I have made 43 episodes. And in this episode, I wanted to do something special. So I asked the audience if they had questions for me about podcasting, and I'm so grateful that people submitted questions. And I'm doing something a bit different where I have invited a guest who is a friend in real life, so you can meet somebody who I just hang out with in real life and have a real history with. So I want to welcome my friend Natalie Cunningham. If you are an eagle-eyed listener and you read the episode descriptions, I have credits for people who have helped me on the show, and where it says a brand strategy by Natalie Cunningham, this is that Natalie Cunningham. So Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Erika. So excited to be here. Happy anniversary for Happy to See Me. I'm happy to see you on this special day.
Thank you. It's kind of crazy to see how far the show has come because just over a year ago, for anyone living in Toronto, you will know this reference. Natalie and I were sitting in the Toronto Reference Library, and Natalie has been so helpful and instrumental in consulting on building the brand for this podcast. And I remember sitting there with this long to-do list, and we're like, how are we going to make this happen? And a year later, it's proof that it's happened.
Yes, one episode at a time, and you really scaled it up. 43 episodes, I can't believe it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think my goal in the first year was 10.
Yeah, you exceeded your target for sure. Amazing.
To give everybody a bit of a history lesson, do you want to tell people how we know each other?
Oh my gosh, for sure. I'd love to. So Erika and I met at Kijiji in 2018. I had the lucky opportunity to partner with her when she was heading up comms and I was working on brand at Kijiji. And I will say, yeah, we had an amazing experience. Obviously, meeting in 2018, we launched, Kijiji Autos there. And quite quickly, we found ourselves in the pandemic and doing all sorts of great things to really bring, Canadians together to safely trade.
Oh my gosh. All of these words, I was like, whoa, getting flashbacks.
I know, right? It's interesting because I think about all of your, following the fact in your style and, thrifting and secondhand and all of your passion. Obviously, I know that side of you, but it's interesting to see the other side as you were, spearheading the secondhand economy index and all the great work that you had led at Kijiji. So I'm always grateful that we met there, but we know our story and chapters continued way beyond. And what an exciting chapter as you are an entrepreneur now and launching your own podcast here with Happy to See Me.
Thank you. Yeah, whenever I tell my story, I feel like a lot of people listening at this point, they know that I worked in a corporate setting for 10 years and now I'm doing what I'm doing. But I'm like, oh, everyone, you get I don't want to say a blast from the past because you and I are still friends. This is still present moment. We have this relationship, but it's like a teeny tiny little peek into Erika's life before Survivor and Erika's life when she was working at the desk job and getting confused for the intern. So yeah, it's like you guys get to know another side of me by hearing me chat with Natalie.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that, even when we met in early days at Kijiji and where I was, seeing the fact that you were overlooked and underestimated often in the boardroom, but always knew that you had the power in the boardroom and definitely led the conversations and where you were going. And even in the early days when you think about, when you're putting your tape together, your audition tape for Survivor and being there through all those steps back then to where you are today. It's amazing to see.
That's true. Because I remember when I saw that Canadians were eligible to be on the show, people had sent me all these messages about it. And I just remember Natalie and I used to sit beside each other and I showed it to you. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to apply for the show now. And you were like, yeah, of course you are. So then was it? Okay, so actually as somebody who was with me in those corporate settings when I was underestimated, when we watched the finale of Survivor and I said that quote that ended up resonating with people where I talked about how I would walk into the boardroom and people would confuse me for the intern and I was actually the one running the meeting. What was that like for you to see me saying that on the big screen?
Yeah, well, as you know, I mean, and something for your audience to know, I remember when you were even doing the audition tape, I was like, yeah, your strategy made sense. Having marketed, Survivor years ago when I was at Global Television and seeing you audition and like put that together and seeing the person that you were, I was like, yes, absolutely. This, Erica's definitely, the idea of like being underestimated, because I knew even when I met you, when I was interviewing, I was like, wow, this is the woman who really like understands this business and is really leading and is being underestimated right now, as we both know. Even in that moment when I met you, I was like, you had all the powerful, like amazing questions to ask, very sharp, knew the business inside out. And you were always, trailblazing, and no one knew really. You were just, wickedly smart and prepared for every conversation. So it didn't surprise me. I think at the finale, to answer your question, I was just like, yeah, so satisfying and rewarding to see you really being recognized for the amazing star that you are.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, you were in the boardrooms
Yeah.
with me when those things were happening. And there were many moments both of us would leave the boardroom and then go to each other and be like, are we crazy? Are we insane? Like, did that just happen?
Yeah.
Because you also have had those moments like that. So it was always nice to have each other in those situations where we could be like, we're not insane, right? We're not crazy. That was weird. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Very validating. Yes. We definitely, not to, bring up every story, but we know that there were quite a few of those moments that needed to be navigated. And I really couldn't have asked for a better partner than in you to be able to navigate those hard, challenging moments. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad I had you. And also, neither of us work for that company anymore. So no one's going to lose their job. We're cool.
No.
No one's at threat because of this podcast.
No, it's all about just having courageous conversations. Even it's worth saying for your audience, even for ourselves. I think that even strengthened our relationship. We had some moments where we had to, confront and be direct and courageous and really like learn what really giving space and standing in your truth really looks like. And I value that. I think that's why we've been able to, continue to grow and evolve together as well.
Yes, honestly. And it's always those harder conversations that bring people closer, even though they're scary. And then now I'm so fortunate that one, you were able to consult and help me in terms of getting the show started. And then now you are back for the anniversary episode where you get to interview me.
Yes, thanks for this opportunity. Well, I will say, let's jump into it, because I know the listeners have lots of great questions, as do I. But maybe kicking us off, when we think about the past year, curious, Erika, what has surprised you the most about creating this podcast?
Ooh, I mean, one is it's a lot more work than people anticipate. Not to say that there's anything wrong with hard work, love working hard, but keeping it consistent for a year, I think that many people, myself included, underestimated how much work it is to always be pitching guests, to make sure that there's a consistent schedule of guests, to be researching, to be recording, and then working with the editor, and then figuring out editorially what are the episodes that I want to run at certain times of the year. It's a lot. It's like taking on like its own job, which again, great, passionate, love doing this. So that was a surprise. I think that now that I'm into my second year, I'm getting a bit better at managing the workflow of doing that. And I think the other thing is I did not expect that I would create as strong connections as I did with the guests that I had. Truly, I was fortunate that I could start the show where most of my guests were people that I was friends with. And I'm so happy that I had so many people who I was friends with who did so many amazing things in pop culture and were creators and were artists and were creative. So I could lean on that pool of people. But then eventually you have to start reaching out to guests, perhaps some you are a little bit familiar with, perhaps some you are not familiar with at all. And I put so much effort into researching and into every single question that I ask that I've just been so surprised, and it's just been so nice that after some of these conversations, I've been able to maintain connections with some of these people and become friends and build relationships with them. And the show ended up being an opportunity to build my network in a way that I never really anticipated. So now that I'm thinking about that too, as I move into the second year, honestly, there are some times where I'm like, oh, who do I want to be friends with And how do I get them onto the show? Can I like, coax them into my life by being like, come be on my podcast? And then after I'm like, can we hang out and be best friends forever?
Yeah, it's awesome. I think, yeah, I'll just say reflecting the community that you said network, but I think, yeah, the community that you brought together, both listeners as well as the talent you brought to your show is amazing. So love that. What is, when you think about the past year and just, if we look over at the other side of like the operational, success of, obviously starting this, can you help your listeners better understand like what was your initial investment and what did you need to, like, where did you start? How did, you have this great idea, but then what's the first step that you took to like really ignite that path?
Yeah. Okay. I know that people are interested in what you need to even like financially invest
Mhm.
in to start the podcast. So let me get it into the nuts and bolts of this because there are certain things that I just didn't realize you needed. One is there's certain subscriptions that you need. So the first thing is you need to have a subscription to a service that essentially hosts your podcast. So when you subscribe to a hosting site, that's where you upload your podcast. And then that site is what connects to all of the podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, etc. So there's a few sites that offer this service. There's sites like Buzzsprout, Podbean, Spreaker. There's lots of them. You can go and research them and check them out. And the monthly subscription rates for these services start at free for some and then can go up to about $25. So I'd say have a look at those and see which package is the right one for you. On top of that, there's also recording cloud type subscriptions that you can get for recording your podcast. So this is if you're going to be recording it virtually. So then options could be like Zoom or certain podcast platforms that are specifically for recording podcasts like Zencaster or Riverside. And those will have different subscription types. So those ones will start at say like $25 a month and can go up to about $100 a month. For me, I use one of the cheaper ones. $100 a month is if you are a professional podcaster and you have many podcasts that use the same platform. So have a look at those things too. And then in terms of things like equipment, I'd say if you want to get started, always just get what you need just to be started and then scale up. So get a USB microphone. The one that I use is the Blue Yeti, which is a very common kind of entry level USB microphone. So that was about $130 on Amazon. And then if you want to do the camera and the video, it's optional. Like using the camera on your computer is totally fine. I have a Sony Z it's a Sony ZV-1F, which is what I guess a lot of YouTube bloggers use. But I also use the camera for other things outside of podcasting. So that's why I made the investment in that camera. But you could use your laptop camera and then scale up later. I have lights that I got on Amazon. And then if you want to be recording more locally, you have the option of scaling up and getting a recording station like a Rodecaster. So that's where you put in an SD card and you would be recording straight onto the hardware versus recording onto a cloud software like Riverside or Zencaster. And then I know somebody has asked me about editing and how to find an editor. So I do have a team who edits the podcast for me. Thank goodness. I think I could do it myself, but it's just a lot better for me to have somebody else do it who can do it faster and way better than I can. So I found an editor through just my community and people I know. I ended up meeting with multiple editors to find someone who understood my show and also was at the right price point for me. So you can go around and look at that. But there are free editors like Audacity, or if you want to do the video thing, then you can use iMovie or whatever comes on your laptop. And also, if you do subscribe to a cloud podcast service like Zencaster or Riverside, now they're starting to be more advanced where you can actually edit the podcast in the platform. And then there are tools that can magically take out ums or pauses. So then there's also that type of editing software as well that would come with your subscription that does give you a bit of a head start in terms of editing. But yeah, I'd say you could start with just getting a microphone and using Zoom and keeping it within the 45 minutes and just starting there. And then you can scale up as big as you want to. But I'd say start with whatever investment you're comfortable with and then allow yourself to get comfortable with the medium and then scale up as you keep going. Because even if you are watching the YouTube version of this, the video that I had for the very first few episodes is so different than the setup I had now. But that's because I'm like, okay, this is fun. It's actually been a few months. I enjoy this. So let me invest in a few other things. So that's the very technical part of getting started.
I love a good technical checklist. So thank you for that, Erika. I think that's awesome. And then thinking about if we take a step back and from a branding perspective, looking overall at your episodes, you have this great music and your obviously like your cover shot, all these other elements. Like just curious if you have any tips for your listeners on how they go about bringing it to life from music to even images and all of those components that really bring it all together.
Yeah, I was really fortunate that I have a really good friend who I've had since I was basically a kid. Well, no, I was a teenager. And he offered to make the intro music for my podcast. So I'm really fortunate I was able to do that. But you are able to find like stock music. There's so many sites where you can buy music that you're able to use at a low cost. So I'd say that's a good place to start. And then you're going to be able to scale up and get something original created down the line. And even with the graphics, I know Natalie, you were so helpful in terms of understanding the vision for the podcast. And I think I didn't even describe to you like the visual identity for the podcast. It just, we worked together so closely that you just knew exactly what was my style and what I needed. So you were so helpful in terms of getting those initial assets put together and then getting them put together in a way where now I have, think of it as a library of images, and then I can go into Canva myself and put together graphics down the line. Fun fact, I did go to school for multimedia design and I should be a graphic designer, but then after I graduated from that program, I never ended up pursuing it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you bring it to life every week to week for sure. I was even thinking of your great headshot, obviously, too. I know that you recently loved the cover art last year and then love that you've updated it for your sophomore year as well.
Yeah. And also funny story. So in terms of how I visually wanted the podcast to look, as I said earlier, Natalie was just like, oh, I understand what Erika likes. So I'm just going to go off and make this happen. And then what she didn't realize is years ago, so before I was even on Survivor, I made a vision board. People who have listened to the podcast know that I am into manifestation. I'm a vision board girl. And on the vision board, I had created podcast cover art where the background was purple. There was shapes with rough edges. There was green as the secondary color. And that was just like, oh, one day this is going to be what my podcast cover art looks like. It had like a different working title at that point, but I'm like, it's going to be this look and feel. So then when Natalie came back to me with the drafts of what the podcast branding would look like, I was like, oh, this is crazy. I've never showed you this image that I made on my vision board, but it's actually the same aesthetic. Obviously, what we ended up with on the podcast is way better than what I made in paint years ago. But it was just, it was just like so crazy that it came to life in the exact way.
That's right. I remember that. The rain, with the rainbow and everything. That was, bananas. That's awesome. Yeah, for sure. Awesome. And then knowing this past year too, like another aspect of the podcast, curious if you can share with your listeners about, the network that you're on and like, what does a podcast network do?
Yes, I get questions about this a lot. I'm really fortunate that in the fall, I signed on with the Sonar Network. So it's a Canadian podcast network here in Toronto. And people always wonder what they do. So primarily, one of the main reasons one wants to sign with a podcast network is because then the podcast network can be responsible for getting you advertising. So folks, I'm sure, have heard over the last few months, now there are advertisements for bigger brands in Canada, maybe other brands in the US. I can't hear what the US ads are, but I'm sure they're great. Love the advertisers. And then they also are now working on getting me more host-read advertising and other campaigns. So you'll start to hear over the next few months more host-read ads, which is great, which means that I am growing and that things are going well. But on top of that, they provide so much support in terms of the community that I'm part of. So I've been able to do guest swaps with other hosts who are within the podcast network. They're able to consult with me on how I can constantly improve the show. I've been able to get more resources from them. So it's like hosting the podcast. I can now become part of their podcast hosting service. Whenever I record in person, that's Sonar Network branded space that I have access to. So I also get access to more resources. So for me, because, well, one, as you can hear from how Natalie and I talk to each other, the one thing that I miss about having a corporate job is having coworkers. So it's nice because I feel like even though now I work independently, I do have this network of people that I can reach out to if I have any questions. So it feels like I have coworkers again. So if you can get on a podcast network, obviously look at the pros and cons for yourself. But I'm so fortunate and so grateful that I became part of the Sonar Network this year.
Yeah, and I remember when you did meet with those that team last year at Comic-Con, I believe it was as well. And together all
Yeah.
our different shows. When Happy to See Me was there, meeting obviously fans and everything. So that's awesome. Taking a step back and thinking about the show itself and back to the manifestation and the board that you did design and think about, can you tell the listeners, like, just share a little bit more about how you did come up with Happy to See Me and what, really ignited the thinking behind the actual content for the show?
I'll go back a few years because years ago, love podcasts. And I always thought my passion was reality TV because I watched so many reality shows. So my initial idea was, this was years ago, keep in mind, I was thinking, oh, I'd have a show where instead of recapping current reality TV shows, I just recap iconic episodes of certain reality TV shows. So I ended up making this really long list on my phone of all of these episodes where it's like Little People, Big World, where Zach gets hit by the pumpkin, or the episode of the Great British Baking Show where the baked Alaska is not put in the fridge, or the episode of Flava of Love where someone shits in Flava Flav's house. It's like very specific, iconic episodes. Of course, there's like more mainstream reality TV. It's like when Colton jumped the fence on The Bachelor. So I had this running list for years, and then the pandemic hit. And since there was no new original content, every show ended up becoming a show where they would just go back and watch old episodes of things. So I'm like, okay, that idea out. I have to start something different. And even when I think about when I was a kid, when people would ask me what I wanted to do, I'm like, oh, I want to be one of those people on Entertainment Tonight, which I did get to do 2 years ago. And I would think, oh, I want to work for a magazine, but I want to be in charge of what I want to write. So I think I've always editorially been interested in having that autonomy. Specifically for the genesis of this show, as folks who listened to the first episode heard, I just really wanted to talk about my survivor experience on my own terms. I just, knowing that I wanted to talk about the emotions that I felt and how this connected to my experience in real life as an Asian woman. I just didn't think that there were existing platforms that were the right space for me to have that exact conversation that I wanted to have. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I just make my own and publish that conversation there? Of course, I had to wait an extra year. So that's why it launched at this time last year. And then when I started to think about how that was so important to me, what were the other conversations that I wanted to host? And I wanted to talk to people where we might have only seen one side of them, or they've gone through the filter of somebody else, or they haven't been able to fully express themselves. So that's what I was initially going for when I was interviewing the first round of guests. And I'm so fortunate that my friends jumped on to be guests on the show. And then after I looked back at the first few episodes, I realized, oh, this isn't just about people who have been on TV and we've only seen one side of them. This is about people who have been underestimated or overlooked in some way. And then that became the ongoing theme for the show. And then that's where it is now. But when I think of the name Happy to See Me, I played around with many, many titles. But with Happy to See Me, one, it plays on the fact that you didn't see me in the first half of my season of Survivor. Now you're able to see me. And there's the joy in being able to finally show who I am and show my point of view in a way that is true to me and in a way that is not going through somebody else's lens. And when I share the stories of the guests, I hope that they feel some type of relief or joy or happiness in allowing people to see a different and authentic side of them. And ultimately, I want people who listen to the show to be happy to be seen for who they are.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. I think you definitely bring that out in your guests and the stories that you share, and giving people the space, that safe space to really courageously be themselves, because you really lead them in being yourself. So that's awesome. Another question that one of the listeners has shared here is, how do you, in those moments that you are sharing authentic moments with your guests, how do you break through awkwardness, or, some of those moments that just like, yeah, through technology, having those moments? Just curious if you have any tips on that.
Well, I'm glad that people think I've broken through awkwardness, because it does still feel awkward. I think especially because so many of the interviews are done virtually. There's still so much somebody starting to talk. Oh, wait, you go first. So thank goodness for editing so we can get rid of that. But I think it's really about just trying to connect with people as you would just anybody that you're meeting. And I know that that's easier said and done. So the way that I normally do it, one, when people log into this cloud platform to start recording the podcast, we don't record right away. I usually have the opportunity to ask people how the day is going, make a joke, see if they're on the same page as me in terms of humor. But yeah, start to probe where they're at and get a sense of reading the room and what type of guests they're going to be before we start recording. Because then hopefully that builds some type of rapport before we hit record.
Mm-hmm.
So through a contact through the Sonar Network, his name is Rob. He is the host of Vanderpump Robs. He is a podcast consultant. And I remember I had a great meeting with him before I came back for season 2. And one of the best pieces of advice he told me is sometimes the interview actually starts 5 or 10 minutes into the interview starting. And then you realize that, oh, sometimes you need to ask a first 1 or 2 questions to get the person warmed up until they're comfortable and they're able to be with you in a more conversational way. So what I've started doing is now when you hear the episodes, you don't necessarily hear the hi, how are you, thank you for being here, because I now cut a lot of the first few minutes of content and have the interview start mid conversation when people are a bit warmer. So that's the other thing. You don't have to keep every bit of audio that you've recorded. You can pick and choose the best bits, and you can make sure that when your guest is shining, that's when the episode starts.
Yeah, that's an amazing tip. That's great. Curious, when thinking about the past year, can you share with us like what's been like one of the biggest challenges, whether it's in the operations or, interviewing a guest, if there were any challenges that you can share with us?
Ooh. I think that I still have a tendency to be, I don't want to say hard on myself, because I think I have a lot of self-compassion, but I think I also have high expectations for myself, even though I know that you shouldn't do that. But I know that there are some times where I'm always on the hunt for guests, and I'm always trying to make a guest schedule that works. And sometimes, just even though you have people who are interested in the show, with scheduling, you just can't have somebody every week, or at least me as an operation of one, it's really hard to have somebody every week. So there have been weeks where I would take a week off, or there have been times where I'm like, okay, let me improvise and do a solo episode just to make sure that I'm constantly making something. And then I remember I would think, oh my gosh, like, am I not a good podcaster because I'm not able to have a consistent guest every week? But then again, I talked to someone from my podcast network, and they were saying that shows usually don't have a new guest every week. It's actually really difficult to have a show where you have a new guest every week. So the fact that I'm able to have 40 plus original guests in my first year is actually a really big achievement. So I shouldn't be hard on myself if I have weeks where it's really hard to get a guest. So I think that I'm trying to focus on that mindset now, because the consistency is hard even on your own, but it's like the consistency with trying to always get somebody new. It's challenging. but I'm getting better at not being hard on myself.
Yeah. I mean, have 43 great guests and more coming. So it's an amazing achievement.
Yes.
To remind everyone, the goal was 10.
Yeah, the goal was 10. And obviously I'm like, oh, I have to do 400 times the goal. I don't know if that's math.
That's how Erika, exceeding own expectations, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Love that. Did I mention Erika's a unicorn? Yes. So curious in terms of, so you've taken us through challenges, the operational. Now, if we shine a light really on the content and the great stories that you brought forward, and even just as you said earlier, in terms of like really about shining a light on those who are underestimated and overlooked. What's, when you think about from that perspective, what's something that often people underestimate or overlook about you?
Oh, about me?
Yeah, just curious.
Ooh. You know what? I think that people still don't realize that everything I do has a lot of intention and strategy behind it. Obviously not in like my regular life, but I think that in terms of the way that I navigate my career and the creative decisions I make, there's always intention and always strategy behind it, even though it might seem unintentional, and maybe it strategically is supposed to seem unintentional. And I'm always thinking about the bigger goals and the next steps. I think that that's the way that I played Survivor too, where you might not realize at the beginning that everything I'm doing is laddering up to something, but it always is. And I don't know. I find that people still don't realize that that's always what is happening. The wheels are always turning. And you know that.
I do. I mean, for all the listeners, I remember even when Erika approached me on this particular idea, the strategy docs, all the good thinking that already started, right? It's about strategy before even building it. So I do appreciate that for sure.
Thank you.
Which is always amazing. There's always a doc with like great thinking that's behind everything. So well thought out for sure. How do you get over the fear of being seen and heard? Do you have advice for anyone there? Because you always see more common, just appreciating. I know you shared your story and there's so many different points, but when I think about, the courage that you bring forward, do you have any tips for listeners on that?
Yeah. I'm still scared.
Mm-hmm.
You don't fully get over it, but you just have to push through. I know that sounds weird, but I always would think, oh my gosh, I remember like one time, I think it was during the pandemic, I went down like a Brene Brown. No, it wasn't even during the pandemic. It was like I borrowed one of your Brene Brown books, actually. I think it was Dare to Lead.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, you go through this exercise of figuring out what your values
That's
are.
right.
So through that exercise, I realized my values are courage and authenticity. So then after that, anytime I made a decision, it was always through the filter of, okay, is this a courageous thing to do? And is this authentic to me? So then when I think about starting the podcast and when I think about the conversations I want to have and what I want to share, that's always what I ask myself. And even when I get nervous to share something or to do something or to put something I create out there, then I ask myself, is sharing it a courageous thing to do? And is it authentic to me? And in which case I'm like, okay, for me to live my values and to do what I want to do and contribute what I want to contribute, then I have to put it out there and I have to do it. And then I also think that after you have done it for so long, you realize so many things. Like, one, nobody's really thinking about you as much as you think about you, even though you are putting your stuff out there and people feel the need to make judgments about everything you do. It doesn't really matter. Also, the podcast is a medium where if people listen and get this far, like what, we're over half an hour into it, they are fans of you and they want to hear what you have to say. So keep saying it. Yes, it's hard to, put yourself out there and then hope that people listen. But once people are listening, they're in it and they want to hear what you have to say. So just trust that. And I think that, I don't know if this sounds cheesy, but there's only one you in the world. So put your voice out there, even if you think that no one cares or it's not important. Like, put it out there because it's you, and there's always going to be an audience for the original voice. That's you. Oh my gosh, that's so cheesy, but
No,
it's
it's
true. It's
true,
true.
and it's so amazing, and yeah, you took me down a bit of a memory lane there when thinking about Brené Brown and, yeah, Braving the Wilderness and Dare to Lead and the branding exercise, the personal
Mhm.
brand, because I think that's, yeah, and the fact that you stand in your courage and your authenticity. Yeah, it's amazing. That's really
Mhm.
inspiring.
And some people like it and some people don't, and that's okay.
Okay, not for everyone, exactly. But I love it. Courage
Mhm.
and and we were talking about this earlier. Authenticity is like a word that often people, and even being courageous, and what those words can be lightly used, but as you say, like when you really truly stand in them in the way that you do, I feel like the difference of that is can be, yeah, it manifests like true change and like opportunities and creating new places as you have
Mhm.
and new spaces with Happy to See Me. So I think that's awesome. I'm curious, if you can share, what's next. Here we are, January 2024, celebrating a year. But as you look into the next year, curious, like, what are you most excited about? Like, you know, who or what are you happy to see in 2024? It could be for your podcast or even just as you're thinking about the next year, what you're really excited about.
Ooh, well, I'm happy to see that I have more comfort in this medium now. And I feel like, oh, it's an ongoing experiment. That's how, at least how I think of it, where I just think, okay, how can I do something a bit better versus last week rather than everything must be perfect all the
Mm,
time. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about being within the Canadian podcast community and building more connections there and meeting more people there. I am excited that as I look towards this year, you know, it's really interesting. When I came off of Survivor, everybody put this false sense of urgency into me where they're like, you have a short window where you can make something of yourself. And then after that, there's going to be winner after winner after winner, and everyone's going to forget about you. And it's true. There's been like 4 winners since I won a couple years ago. But I realized this sense of urgency, I don't know. I don't think that it necessarily is as scary as people make it sound, because I realize, oh, if you are consistently working hard and you are consistently making things and putting yourself out there, there will be opportunities for you. That's the thing though. It's like you have to start once you have this moment where you get the attention, but I'm like, oh, it's kind of bullshit. I think as long as you're consistently working hard, there is going to be benefits and there is going to be opportunity that comes to you. So now that I've realized that, I'm like, okay, if I know that as long as I'm consistent, that I can always make things happen, what do I want to focus on? So I'm like, okay, more creating things and more making things. And as much as I love Happy to See Me, and as much as I love that the platform has allowed me to be able to hone my storytelling skills that are rooted in empathy and being able to be inspirational and have these pep talks, a big part of what I do as a storyteller that I think people don't realize is creating content with heart and humor and being able to write jokes. I feel like, again, as much as I love this platform, it isn't the right platform for me to really explore my humor creatively. So that is something that I'm trying to work on with some creative projects that I have going
nice.
on in the background. So I'm excited to explore that. But when it comes to the podcast specifically, I always have irons in the fire when it comes to guests. And I have really exciting people I am in touch with to be on the show. There are people where I think people are thinking, oh, I would love to see Erika talk to them. And I'm like, trust me, it is in the works. The people that you might have not heard from in a while that you would love to hear me talk about, I am working on those people. They are interested. We are just scheduling. So there are really exciting people who I think you would love to hear me talk to. But then there are also people who you might not be as familiar with, who might not be from reality TV, who I'm also in touch with. And yeah, just they have really interesting stories and really interesting points of view to share too. So I'm also really happy to see the guests that are incoming for the show.
When you look back in your first year, are there any standout moments that are like sparkling as your favorite that you want to highlight?
Ooh, so it's hard to pick a
Mhm.
favorite because obviously I love
Yes.
everybody. In terms of guests, there's one guest that I still can't get over. that I had on the show, and that was episode 13, talking to Todd Herzog. So Todd was my all-time favorite Survivor winner. I remember watching Todd when I was a teenager, and I just related to him so much, and it was so amazing to watch him win. And for years, I always said, Todd's my favorite, all through casting, all through pre-show press. I always talked about how Todd was my favorite. So to not only get Todd to agree to be on my show, because Todd doesn't do a lot of long form interviews like this. Even when he agreed to do it, he said he doesn't normally do shows like this, but he said, oh, I'll do your show because I heart you. So to have him on the show, and for him to be so vulnerable, and for him to make a point of taking some of the time to talk about how he really enjoyed watching me and how he was rooting for me, it was just like, my brain was short circuiting. I just could not believe that somebody I had looked up to for so long was on my show and was complimenting me. So that was just such an amazing moment. And then when I think about other moments from the show, truly, there's all of the guests, all of the interviews, I've got something out of them. There was one interview where I always quote this person. So it was episode 7 when I talked to Julie Nolke, and Julie had talked about being perceived as an overnight success because she made the pandemic video on her comedy YouTube channel that blew up. And she had told the story of how she went to theater school for 4 years. And then after that, it took 7 years of auditioning before she got her first acting job. And I'm like, oh my God, she went to school for it and she still had challenges for years. So now I always think that, because when you switch into any new career, and I think especially when you're in media and entertainment and you're working as a freelancer, the first few years are very scary. Okay. I feel like I seem like I have it together, but it is always really scary. And there's so many moments where you have self-doubt and you wonder, oh my God, do I need to leave this and go back to a quote unquote real job? So then I always tell myself, I'm like, Julie Nolke went to school for 4 years and then she auditioned for 7 years. And then now look at her. She is still killing it on YouTube. She is an actress. She's in the writer's room for Run the Burbs. And I've had multiple cast members from Run the Burbs on the show. And she's killing it because she stuck to what she was passionate about and she persevered. So that moment will always stick out to me. And then if there was any other one, honestly, there's always something from every episode. Like I really love all of the people I've had.
For sure. And then thinking about, so those are great moments. And then thinking about the over 48 episodes that you have, curious how you would guide your listeners where to start. Do you start at episode 1? Do you jump in the middle? Does it matter? Do you start from like the end and work your way back? Yeah. How would you, guide your listeners?
You have to start at episode 1. I still think to this day, episode 1 is one of the most honest things that I've recorded, potentially because by the end, I think I was a little drunk. But still, it was just such an honest conversation where I shared my true feelings about what it was like for me to watch Survivor. And I've had friends, even you included, who listened to the episode and after they were like, I had no idea this is how you were feeling watching the show. And it really sets the tone for my point of view and who I am, and even the story I told about the high school TV show. So if you haven't listened to it already, I'd say episode 1 is definitely where to start. And then from there, pick and choose some of the goodies. Look at the guests and the topics that you're interested in, and I trust you to navigate it however you want.
Yeah, and I highly recommend even repeating. There's a few favorites that just, are worth repeating.
Okay, so out of curiosity, I know you've listened to almost all of the episodes at this point. Are there any episodes that stick out for you?
Yeah, for me, I think it's one of the early ones. I think it's episode 5 with Big Brother Canada's Jay Northcott. That episode,
love Jay.
Yeah, this, the story that they shared in terms of just like how they grew up and even from smudging and their Big Brother Canada experience. But I just felt like we really got an insight, like just the heart of what, wonder and challenges Jay has gone through and overcome, and then how, creating new opportunities for others and the talent and the creativity that Jay has. And I just really felt the connection that you both had really took the listener on a journey of really understanding from childhood to adulthood, like all the different experiences. I loved that episode a lot, for sure.
Oh, that one was one of my favorites. And Jay is one of my favorite people I've met from reality TV in Canada. I know that we met, well, we actually didn't meet from being on reality shows. We just happened to be in the same place at the same time. And then they introduced themselves to me. But even in that episode, I felt like I was learning so much about my friend and how they talked about the nuances of sharing Indigenous traditions
Mhm.
on camera. I had no idea about that. And yeah, I'm so grateful that Jay went on the show and was so vulnerable and so open with that.
Yeah, and I felt, yeah, when you look at a lot of your episodes, I feel we go on these journeys, and the ability that you have to really connect meaningfully with your guests and really bring out stories and conversation really makes you feel like you're there at a fireside chat with both of you and just getting an inside view and really seeing what, challenges people overcome and also the great things that they create. So I've been highly moved by a lot of episodes for sure.
Thank you. I've had multiple guests tell me that it feels like going to therapy when they're a guest on the show. So maybe I need to charge an hourly rate or something.
Totally. It's interesting. I will say this. I think as a listener, at the end, it makes you question yourself in new ways and see new things about yourself and those around you, for sure. I think there is this like aha moment, and like you always walk away a little bit more aware, I think, which is really awesome.
Oh, that's what I really
Mhm.
wanted. That's what I really set out to
Yeah,
do.
it's great. And
Thank you for saying that.
as you know, Erica, I've also shared your podcast with um, yeah, my, family members as well. And I feel like it has been very therapeutic. There's certain episodes, like when you hear a story that really resonates, that you feel like, can't necessarily understand, but I see how this episode or this story of this amazing person can really help unlock and be a connection for someone else. And so that's also been a really great gift of your podcast that I've loved to share with others as well. So it's been really amazing in that way.
Oh my God, thank you for sharing. And honestly, if anyone is listening and they have shared the podcast with anybody, thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, it really means a lot to hear that because ultimately that's what I wanted. When I made the show, I wanted people to listen and either think, yeah, I get it. I see myself there.
Mhm.
Or, oh, I've learned something about another experience and I can see somebody else more clearly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you.
So I know your listeners are really curious about, with all the great guests that you've brought on and more to come, as you mentioned. How do you find guests? Like, what is the strategy behind finding guests?
Yeah, so two parts to it. Okay, this is where I share more of strategic thinking, former communications manager Erica. So there's a few things to it where one, with the guests, it's like figuring out who are the types of people that you have on the show because the guests you have on the show also help to build the brand of the show. So I always have this list going of people who are a mix of reality TV people, social media people, experts, artists, creators, actors, writers who are in pop culture. And I'm always looking at the mix of people trying to figure out who makes sense to have at this point in time for the show to evolve in the way that I want it to. So I'd say first, before you start your show, make a long, long, long list of people that you want to have as a guest. I've been fortunate that people that I've went for have said yes. I've also had people have to decline for various reasons, and that's okay. So just have a very long list. In terms of booking guests, so this is also a challenging part too. And this is where I draw my experience from when I worked in communications and public relations. I had to do this thing called media relations, where essentially I'd have lists of 100 journalists and I'd have to pitch them to write stories about my clients. And there's a very high failure threshold in doing that job where you email 100 people. And if 3 people write a story about one of your clients, great, awesome. So I have a high threshold for cold emailing people and getting rejected, and it's fine. And get used to doing that too, and cold DMing and whatever. And I've also now been on the side where I have had to pitch people working in media relations. I've had to pitch guests to come onto my podcast. I've had people now pitch me to be guests on my podcast. And I've had people pitch me to be a guest on their podcast. So I'd say my advice for pitching is just based on my personal experience, but you have to make your pitch something that people will have an easy time saying yes to. So there's just key information you have to have in the pitch, like what is your show about? And why do you want to talk to this specific person? And who are similar guests that you've had on your show? But another key piece of information that I find is missing a lot when people pitch me to be on their shows is you have to tell the person what you want to talk about. So don't necessarily send them the list of questions for the conversation during the pitch phase, but it's like, let them know, like, this is what I specifically want to talk to you about, because then it makes it easy for someone to kind of visualize what the conversation will be about, and they can assess whether or not it's valuable for them to be a guest on your show or not. I've had people pitch me and I have asked, what do you want to talk about? And this has happened multiple times, but then they're not able to actually tell me what they want to talk about. So unfortunately, it just doesn't work out to have me on the show. On the flip side, I've had shows that are newer shows or smaller shows and shows that are just getting their legs, and they've been able to pitch me and tell me the conversation they want to have. And I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. This is a conversation I want to be part of. And I've said yes. And I've done podcasts that probably people are surprised that I've said yes to, because even though they might be up and coming and just getting started, they're able to pitch me a conversation that's of interest. So yeah, I'd say if you are reaching out to people, one, like, just go for it. Even if somebody seems too big, just throw it out there, because you never know who's going to say yes. But make sure you're giving them all the information they need in order for it to be easy to say yes to you.
When it's all said and done and you think about all the effort, the time, the resources, you took us through earlier about just the cost involved as well. But is it all worth it to do a podcast? For those who are listening and thinking about creating their own podcast, is it, in the end, would you say it's worth it?
Ooh, okay. So worth it is a hard one for me to answer, because for something to be worth it, there needs to be some type of metric involved. So it's like, how do you define worth? I know this should be like an inspirational answer, but I'm like, how do you define worth? Like, what do you want to get out of it? I've had people ask me multiple times if it's worth it. And I'm like, well, it depends. Like, what do you want to get out of it? So I think if you can define what you want from the experience, one, it's going to take a long time for a podcast to become profitable. So if you are looking for a get rich quick thing, not worth it. This is not what you should be doing. But if you are particularly interested in storytelling or creating or platform building, or you're just passionate about the topic that you're talking about and you want to be able to build community, or many of the other reasons to start a podcast, I think it can be worth it. For me, definitely worth it. I have, other professional goals that are in the master strategy documents for this podcast, which I won't completely go over because I can't give away everything that I see on the horizon. But in terms of wanting to tell stories and be courageous and authentic and connect and build a community, it has been worth it. And honestly, like, doing this show has helped me to learn things about me and has changed my life in like many ways, like more than you can even imagine. So it for sure has been worth it for me. And as things go on and as I see that it unlocks more and more opportunities for me, it continues to be worth it. So yeah, I'd say for me, it's worth it. Would it be worth it for you? Potentially. It just depends on, what you want out of it.
So Erika, we know when we think about the strategy doc and all like the vision for Happy to See Me, there's so many other projects on the go and you are really busy out there doing a lot of things. So if people want to reach out or know other things that you're involved in, where else can people see you?
Yeah. I mean, podcast, everywhere you get your podcast, and on Instagram and on YouTube. So it's at Happy to See Me Pod on both of them. But I say that at the end of every episode. If you don't already follow me on social media, please do. It's Instagram at Erika_Cass. Same on Twitter. Not as active on Twitter, but sometimes I pop in there and say something. And then on TikTok, I'm my full name at Erika Casupanan. And I went through a phase where I didn't TikTok a lot trying to do that more. We'll see what happens. And then other things I'm working on. One, there's always work in progress to do more TV, because I would love to do more multi-platform storytelling. So TV, film, always work in progress there. And then I also work as a keynote speaker. So I go to corporate events, conferences, schools. I've done kids to university and college students. And I used to be a writer and speech writer when I worked in corporate communications. And now I've been writing speeches for myself and delivering them. So if you ever want to meet me in person and have me come be a keynote speaker at your event, hit me up. You can email me. My email is in my Instagram bio and we can figure that out. But yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that I work as a keynote speaker as well. And then I'm the occasional influencer, but oh my gosh, I could like do a whole episode about what it's like being a quote unquote influencer, but I occasionally do brand deals on social media. I am very picky about the ones that I do. But hey, if you are a brand and you want to sponsor this underestimated winner, hit me up and we can see if it works out. Is there anything else I'm doing? I feel like you always know all the things I'm doing.
Oh, those are all really good things. I think there's always what's yet to come and what's to be discovered. For brands who are thinking about reaching out, it's important that they meet the criteria of your values, going back to like courage and authentic. So they know something to be thoughtful of.
Yeah, because I feel like I named the public things. I think that after listening to this episode, people are going to know that there's this elusive strategy doc that has all the other things that I'm not talking about publicly yet too. So, oh my gosh, everyone just trust. You'll see the contents of the doc in real life one day, but just, or who knows, maybe I do an episode where I'm like, here's everything on the doc. No, but I can't. That's too many things. That's too many secrets.
Yeah, I suppose can't do the reveal of like Erika's empire coming soon.
Exactly. But it's in progress. Natalie, thank you so much for interviewing me today and for all of your help behind the scenes in getting Happy to See Me to where it is at. Was there anything you were happy to see this week?
I'm very happy to see you and celebrate this first year. It's been amazing, I have to say. Yeah, just really excited for season 2 this next year, the sophomore year, and what's to come, Erika. So thank you so much for this, spending time with me today. This is really a lot of fun.
Thank you. Here's to year 2, everybody.